Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Dan. I'm on the Hasselblad marketing team here, speaking to you from the New York area, and really appreciate you joining us for today's live broadcast. You are among hundreds of other Hasselblad owners online with us, and excited to have you here along with my own colleagues across the United States and around the world. Now, late last week, we rolled forward one of our biggest product evolutions yet, and for many of you watching, it won't cost you a thing. I'm, of course, talking about our firmware updates. And as is tradition over the past few years, this update isn't a simple matter of bug fixes and speed improvements. And while there are some of those in the firmware update, what's really come to light is a slew of new features for owners of the Hasselblad X and V system. Firstly, firmware 1.2.0, which addresses the X1D II 50C and 907X Special Edition, and firmware 0.1.24 for the XCD45P, which expands the capabilities of our most portable lens across all X system camera owners. Let's start with the camera firmware. When we first announced X1D II last year, we mentioned that we wanted to bring forward features like video in a noticeably improved way. And with this latest update, owners of both the X1D II 50C and 907X Special Edition can now create stunning medium format video. Your choice of 1080 or 2.7K resolutions is selectable at a 29.97p frame rate in beautiful 420 8-bit color and the widely accepted H.264 codec. On both cameras, the full width of the sensor is used in a 16:9 aspect ratio, resulting in a massive 50.25mm image circle. Now, in comparison, that's more than 16% larger than typical full frame video capture and nearly double that of a comparable Super 35 frame. Audio is captured either by the internal microphones on both cameras, or self-powered external microphones can be used thanks to both cameras' 3.5mm input and 3.5mm headphone jack for output in playback. Now, while in video mode, it's important to note that only manual focusing is available, but that being said, features in the Hasselblad user interface do make this easier. Simply double tapping on the rear screen will magnify the image by 50%, double tap again to zoom out. Alternatively, for supercritical focusing, you can also set up for a higher 100% magnification in the focus menu. Now, conveniently, these can also be mapped to a custom button as well. Pressing the display button on the rear of the camera cycles through a number of overlay options, including a thirds grid, focus peaking, or a combination of both. And while these overlay options appear both in live view and recording, they are just a preview, meaning that they don't save to the video file actually being recorded to the SD card. Ultimately, we feel that the improvement of the video recording mode is noticeable both in resolution and stability of the overall feature. And online at Hasselblad.com, we've added a number of sample clips for you to download and view. These are linked in the Learning More PDF that's in today's handout section. Take a look and check it out at your time. Our next few features continue in evolving the flexibility and usability of current X and V system cameras. Now, for many of these features, I'll be showing them to you on an X1D II, but they are available in the same way on the 907X Special Edition. Let's start with one of our most requested features, focus bracketing. As many of our first generation X1D owners can attest, this easily enabled tool significantly streamlines the automated capture of a sequence of separate images, shifting the focal position in between shots. Now, in the menu, you'll simply designate the step size or the amount of shift in each focus movement, the number of frames for the total sequence, anywhere from 2 to 1,000, the initial delay between pressing the shutter button and the sequence starting, the exposure delay, which is the amount of time in between each shot. Now, this is good if you're using Studio Flash and need to account for recycle times. Sequence direction dictates whether the focus bracket's towards infinity, which is further from the camera, towards the near limit, closer to the camera, or in both directions symmetrically. Finally, the behavior when the sequence is finished, whether it stays in focus bracketing mode or returns to a normal single frame capture. So let's take a look at a scenario where we might use this. In this example, I've got a bit of a macro product set up, and because of the object distance, the depth of field is quite thin, even though we're stopped down. So we'll go ahead and input a sequence of 4 frames, add a delay of a ½ second to account for flash recycle, and set the direction to focus towards infinity. Focus bracketing then proceeds to capture 4 separate images of the sequence, each shifting the focus towards infinity further across the scene. The resulting 4 separate files have a shifting area of sharpness gradually across the scene, and using a third-party program like Photoshop, Helicon Focus, or Serene Stacker, you can then merge the images to a single file with much greater depth. Now, admittedly, we're keeping things brief, and that's a very simple overview of how the focus bracketing system works, but in our PDF user guides are some very, very well-written and documented instructions, along with some examples that help further explain this feature at finer detail. Links are in that Learning More PDF in today's handout section as well. Another small update is in the exposure bracketing menu, where we've added a new 2/3 stop option for the bracket amount, giving you even more flexibility when capturing an exposure bracket sequence. The updated white balance menu features improved organization with temperature and tint readouts at each preset, and additionally, the widely requested feature of a white balance picker has also been added. Now, this intuitive tool lets you sample a previously captured image in order to set the camera's white balance settings. In this example, you can see that my settings aren't so great, so I'll just drag the eyedropper tool to a neutral portion of the image, and the camera remeasures a neutral color balance setting. These are displayed on the top right-hand corner of the screen, and confirming that measurement will update my camera's white balance setting, which is now taking effect on the next incoming capture. What's neat is that this is all in play, and now for my next capture, it's now reflecting a scene accurate color setting for the white balance. Now, another feature addition in this firmware update comes to saving you time in post-processing and organization. X1D II and 907X now offer in-camera star rating. When you're reviewing the images, simply tap the star button on the rear of the camera to apply star ratings from 0 to 5 stars, and those are saved in the file's metadata. Now, these star ratings will appear when you open the images in programs like our Focus software along with Lightroom or Bridge, saving you time and organization after the fact. Specific to the X1D II platform, 3 features that really increase the flexibility of this already powerful camera. Firstly, white balance has been added to MQ mode. Now, if you're not immediately familiar with MQ, it's a great option when you need to shoot as quickly or quietly as possible. This closes the shutter in the lens, reducing the amount of movements and time needed in between each capture. Though keep in mind that because the shutter is closed, live view and autofocus are disabled. The new auto white balance and MQ option samples the image captured for color balance, resulting in a more accurate image and more accurate white balance from this typical kind of shoot from the hip or pre-composed and pre-focused exposure mode. Next, when it comes to custom buttons, we all love the ability to map a multitude of functions to the 3 customizable buttons on the X1D II, and we've added a quick reset function in this menu that brings things back to default quite easily. Finally, of the 3 is the ability to adjust the sensitivity of the X1D II's electronic viewfinder eye sensor. The new eye sensor distance option in the display menu brings an added level of customization. Now, as handheld friendly as the X1D II is, we did hear from some users that the way they hold the camera sometimes misengages or errantly engages the electronic viewfinder. So the normal setting, which is by default, is now joined by a short setting, which engages at a shorter distance between the viewfinder shroud and the user. Alternatively, if you're working in a scenario that favors the rear screen 100% of the time, you can set it to off, meaning that the camera will only use the rear touchscreen, completely disabling the electronic viewfinder. Now, wrapping up camera firmware, let's touch on a few updates exclusive to the 907X Special Edition, or rather some neat features when using the digital back on its own with a V-System camera. Firstly, we've expanded the cameras that can be used. Now, longtime owners of CFE products will recall that focal plane V-System cameras required modification in order to use a digital back. Now, unmodified 200 and 2000 series cameras can be used alongside nearly every other V-System camera, including the iconic 500 series to an EL body, an SWC, even a technical camera with a V-mount rear standard. We've also added auto white balance, significantly simplifying the process of capturing beautiful images, whether you're using the 907X with XCD lenses or on the back of a V-System camera. Moving on to lens firmware, the XCD45P also receives an update with version 0.1.24. Firstly, the sensitivity of the full-time manual focus has been improved. This means that when you have autofocus enabled, the point where the focus ring disables the motor and takes over for manual focusing has been tuned for better handling characteristics. Secondly is the addition of focus bracketing to the XCD45P, which expands this already useful feature to all XCD lenses on all X-System cameras. Importantly, you must have a lens firmware of 5.33 or later with the current and recommended being 5.40. The exception to this, of course, is with the 45P having an independent firmware file due to the differences in its build. Finally, let's do a quick refresh on how to stay up to date with the current firmware. And before we jump to that, I would like to throw out a quick poll just to see the state of your own cameras, recognizing that a number of our attendees today are existing X system camera owners. Now, honesty is appreciated here because this helps us better understand how we're rolling out firmware updates and that we're delivering the newest features in an efficient way. So we'll give a second for everyone to respond. Great. Looks like an overwhelming majority of our users today do stay up to date with the latest firmware, and a couple of people wait a second to update to what's been released. So we'll give a couple more seconds there to gather a few more responses. Appreciate your honesty and candor there. All right. Thank you and appreciate your feedback there. Well, let's jump on back to that firmware refresh. Now, firstly, we'll want to make sure that the battery is fully charged. And from there, we have two methods in updating the firmware for the current X and V system cameras. The first option we're discussing applies specifically to the X1D II 50C and 907X Special Edition since we're using the Focus Mobile 2 iPad app. Now, if you're curious and want to learn more about Focus Mobile 2, do check out our previous webinar on this very topic. It and other previous webinar recordings are linked in that Learning More PDF in the handout section. Now, for this update, from the iPad, you'll need both a connection to the internet for the iPad along with the wired connection option to the camera. Now, in this visual example, I've got the 1 meter USB-C to C cable from Hasselblad available on our web store, linked in that Learning More PDF too. And that on the top left-hand corner settings of my iPad, I have Enable Updates turned on. Then both the camera and the lens show that an update is available. From there, tapping on Update under each will allow the app to download the firmware files from our server and install them to the camera. Alternatively, if you aren't using Focus Mobile 2, or you have the first generation X1D, or you just prefer manual setups, let's go with option 2, starting with a visit to Hasselblad.com. Now, this does include a registration and sign up for a My Hasselblad account, and just out of curiosity, we'll launch another poll to see how many of us joining today do have a My Hasselblad account already. Now, if you don't, it's a great way of staying up to date on the latest features, as well as a registry for the cameras and lenses that you own, so definitely do encourage it. But surprisingly, seeing that coming up on about a quarter of our attendees today don't yet have a My Hasselblad account, so do encourage you to head on over and sign up there. Beautiful, appreciate that. So once we're on the website and you're logged into My Hasselblad, you'll be navigating over to the firmware and manuals page. And once you're there, you'll be able to select your camera and lens as a drop-down menu, and then the respective firmware file for download. Now, Hasselblad's firmware files for the X system cameras and lenses are saved in a .cim format. To install them, simply download them, copy them to an SD card from your computer, and insert into the camera. On the camera side, access the main menu by swiping up from the bottom of the touchscreen or tapping the menu button on the bottom right. From there, you'll tap the gear icon for general settings, scroll down to service, and select check for update. At that point, you'll be given the option to select which specific file you want to install. If you've copied multiple firmware files, say for example, camera firmware and lens firmware, they'll both appear here. Now, if for some reason those files aren't showing up in this menu, first try formatting the card in the camera, which will erase the card completely, and then copy them again from your computer onto the SD card and repeat the steps in towards of navigating the menu system. If you own multiple lenses, each lens will need to be updated individually as the firmware is installed onto the lens. Now, camera updates can take anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes, lens updates around a minute or two. But one key word of caution here is that regardless of the install method, be it from the iPad or via an SD card, a part of the update includes a power cycle or a restart of the camera and lens. Now, on some lenses, the focus mechanism may move a little bit. And for that reason, we highly recommend not resting the camera in a way that might obstruct the lens from focusing or moving to prevent unexpected damage. So let's wrap things up with a short summary. Firstly, camera firmware 1.2.0 for the X1D II 50C and 907X Special Edition, really expanding your creative toolset with beautiful medium format 2.7K video, adding in features like focus bracketing for all XCD lenses, simplifying the capture of expansive depth. Improved white balance settings with more information in the graphical menu and the super intuitive white balance eyedropper tool, and convenient features like in-camera star ratings, save to the image's metadata and saving you time in post-production and post-processing organization. 2/3 stop options for focus bracketing across both cameras, and for the X1D II specifically, EVF proximity options that better handle how each person handles the camera uniquely. Auto white balance in MQ mode has been added, along with a quick reset for the custom button settings. Over to the 907X Special Edition, expanded support of mechanical cameras to the digital back, namely 200 and 2000 series focal plane cameras, and auto white balance in all configurations of camera and digital back. Finally, with the XCD45P, our most compact and portable lens, now supports focus bracketing across all cameras of the X system, from the first generation X1D to the 907X Special Edition to the current X1D II 50C, along with improved handling characteristics between autofocus and manual focus. We'll take a few questions from our live audience in a moment, but before we do that, two small reminders and requests. The first is an opportunity for us to hear from you. Following the session, before you close your browser window or the GoToWebinar app, do give us a second where you'll be asked to take a survey. Your feedback here really helps us plan future sessions, and if there's a topic or area of knowledge that you want us to cover specifically in a future webinar, do mention that in the comments box there. We do appreciate your feedback here. Lastly is the reminder of that Learning More PDF in the handout section of today's webinar. It includes links to previous webinar recordings, including our Focus 3.5 desktop software, and the mobile app and mobile options for image processing, and other useful resources that we've mentioned today in today's broadcast. Also includes links to our future events, which I hope you can join us this Thursday for our virtual medium format meetup being held at 12 o'clock noon Los Angeles time, 3 p.m. in New York, 8 p.m. in London, or 9 p.m. in Stockholm. Our guest will be Chris Gunn, the lead photographer attached to NASA's James Webb Space Telescope project. Chris is an amazing photographer and regular user of both X and H systems, and he'll be talking about the challenges of documenting the many activities surrounding humankind's largest space telescope. As a widely published and award-winning photographer, I'm really looking forward to hearing from him on Thursday. Now, if you can't make that live broadcast, do register anyway in order to receive a link to the recording afterwards. So with that, let's actually jump over to a few questions. First question we have here from the audience is, can we use focus bracketing on non-XCD lenses via an adapter? At the moment, focus bracketing is limited to native XCD lenses from 21 millimeters to the 135 teleconverter. So if you're using the XH adapter, for example, with H lenses, it's not an option that's available at the moment. So right now, just limited to just the X lenses. Next question comes from Peter, who's asking what the difference between video and the first generation X1D and the current generation X1D II is. So the first generation X1D offered 1080 or HD quality video at 25 frames, which is based on the PAL standard. The X1D II and the 907X Special Edition offer video at 2.7K, so 2720 by 1530 at a 29.97 frame rate, which is gradually being more widely accepted for web video. You can still set the camera to a 1080 or 1920 by 1080 HD option if you don't need the extra resolution. So it's a nice option if you need to basically save file space on the SD card. Our next question is from Paul, asking us what areas or what other areas, back to focus bracketing, might that feature be useful for. So the example we showed was a bit of a product setup, so close focus using typically a macro lens, maybe extension tubes. But another area we might use this is in landscape. When you have a particularly wide area, but you have subject matters both in the foreground and the background of the scene. So in this case, what I would do is set my focus position to the foreground or what's closer to me, and then set a higher number of sequence shots towards infinity. So covering a fair option in terms of focus depth. So the other perspective or the other option in terms of using focus bracketing when you're shooting items in perspective or they run perpendicular to the lens. So this is typically where one might have used a view camera in the past, but now with the inbuilt camera option, you can set up a sequence that captures objects in both the foreground and background, just like our landscape, but maybe at a different scale, and giving you the option to then merge them or stack them in third party down the road. Oh, great question about how to check current lens firmware settings. So there are two ways of doing this. The first is on the rear camera, going to the general settings or the gear icon, and then going to about. That will show you a number of options or number of features, including your serial number, the current firmware on the camera, and the current firmware on the lens. Similarly, so if you're using the Focus Mobile 2 app for iPad, connecting it and opening up the settings icon will allow you to see what firmware is currently on the lens itself. Oh, great. Another question about video recording. Angela, who's asking us, what impact does video have on battery life, and is there a maximum clip limit? Yes, excellent question, and yes to both. The first is that recording video will impact the battery life. You will see it drain faster than just shooting normal still images. But one great option here is the USB partial power, meaning that the X1D II and 907X allow you to partially power the camera over the USB Type-C port. So using a USB battery bank or a wall outlet allows you to supplement the battery in the camera. Now you still need a battery in the camera, but it helps draw things out a bit longer. Now there is a clipped file limit at 29 minutes as the maximum, but the other factor in hand is a thermal limit. So because the sensor heats up while it's recording video, we put in a thermal limit to prevent any damage. And so if you're in a couple scenarios, working outdoors in a particularly hot climate, or you're recording multiple simultaneous long takes or long clips, you may encounter that thermal limit. And that's really just built in there to prevent damage to the sensor itself. I have a follow-up question to that of what is the file format of the video? So from the X1D II and 907X Special Edition, the files are saved as a .mp4 file format, so within that H.264 codec. This differs a little bit from the video recording feature on a couple of our other cameras, namely the H series, which offer both H.264 and a 3FV RAW video. At the moment, we can't really comment on RAW video options. We're always looking to expand the feature set, but for the moment, files or video files saved from the X1D II and 907X will be in an H.264 or .mpeg4 format. Let's see. Have a lot of requests for a future session on focus bracketing. Definitely understood and heard there. And do mention that in the comments section as well, so we can better plan. Do mention what style of photography you're going for. Is it landscape? Is it in-studio product? And hopefully we can plan for those in the future. Do have a question about with the digital back on the 200 series, is that done in electronic shutter rather than electronic shutter versus the focal point shutter? So the option that we've added with the 200 and 2000 series focal point cameras, you're still using the focal point shutter. We've just added the communication connectivity between camera and digital back. Now the caveat here being that mechanical cameras do have a pretty wide gamut of tolerances. So if the camera hasn't been CLA'd in a second or hasn't been serviced and calibrated in a second, it may not necessarily connect and communicate to the digital back successfully. So do keep that in mind. But it is using the mechanical focal plane shutter on the focal plane camera, not just the electronic shutter. Great. We'll wrap things up with a couple of more just questions here. Great. Love seeing the request for a future session on focus bracketing and video mode. Will there be a Chrome edition of the 907X from Gerhard? Yep, we are planning a 907X camera and back that is in line with the iconic design lines and visual aesthetic of the V system. So do keep an eye out for future announcements as we go. Oh, can we edit the video from X1D and Focus for desktop? So at the moment, no. Focus for desktop only edits the Hasselblad 3FR/FFF files and basic support for third-party RAW files on Mac. Really for an editor, we would look towards something like Adobe Premiere, Final Cut, that sort of aspect. It is a very standard H.264 MPEG file, so pretty widely accepted by most programs. Awesome. Do you have some questions about macro accessories for the X series from Peter? Do take a look at the 120 macro, which is a great option. Hasselblad doesn't offer extension tubes on our own, but there are a couple third-party options out there, like from PhotoDiox, for example, that retain control of the leaf shutter and electronic communication of the lens. So really nice kind of solution for close focus there. And we'll just pick one last question here. Any lens is recommended over others for video, from Phil Becker. Phil, shout out for keeping your firmware up to date. Love seeing what you add to the community there. All of the XCD lenses really work well on the X1D II, but what's really neat is that video records regardless of any lens. So if you're using an adapted lens, say like a V system lens or an H system lens, really they're really stunning. But in terms of optical performance, the XCD lenses are really astounding. Really highly recommend that, but sure you'll be enjoying all of it. So with that, we'll appreciate your questions there and wrap up today's session. Do thank you for joining us for today's broadcast. Do stick around for that survey afterwards, and hope to see you at a future broadcast with Hasselblad, maybe this Thursday, if not down the road. But thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.